Good morning, boys and girls, and welcome to another wonderful week of social studies. We are going to be finishing up our American Revolutionary War this week. We're going to talk about a few documents today, battles tomorrow. Wednesday is going to be a catch-up day, and then Thursday we're going to finish everything up. And then Friday you are going to have an assessment. So please make sure that you are going back and making sure that you have all of your notes from last week, as well as making sure you stay with me for this week because you will be able to use them for your test on Friday. For today, my friends, we are not going to label today's notes other than to say that we are talking about the important documents. There are going to be two that we focus on more so than the others right now. And the first one that we're going to focus on does take place in North Carolina. In April, 1776, we do not have an official date. In Halifax County, colonists from North Carolina got together and signed the Halifax Resolves. The Halifax Resolves, again, was just a document, but it called for the colonies to break away from Britain. So still those 13 colonies up and down the East Coast. So called for colonies to break away from Britain, from that tyrant King George. Okay. Now, with this document, North Carolina became the first colony to declare or call for independence. We can say NC, North Carolina, was the first colony to call for independence. So if you ever have heard the saying, or some people may have seen it on license plates as well, where it says North Carolina first in freedom, this is what it's referring to. We were the first to call for that independence. That's why we're referred to as first in freedom. Now, some of you may have also seen first in flight. We will get to that later this year. The next document that we're going to talk about is on a very important date, and I'm sure we all know the date, maybe just not the year, but July 4th of 1776. On July 4th of 1776, colonists got together, the representatives got together, and signed the Declaration of Independence. July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence. This was signed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so a little bit more north of us, a northern state. But representatives from the 13 colonies approved the Declaration of Independence. Now, it's important to know, we're going to make a little note here about what a declaration is. A declaration is an official statement. Okay, it is an official statement. This was originally drafted as a letter to King George. Benjamin Franklin was put in charge of writing this declaration. However, anyone who was a part of the Declaration of Independence, of signing it, of putting it together, they were risking their lives. King George still wanted that control over the colonists. So for them to declare their independence, to break away from him, it did not make him happy. They risked their lives, they put their lives in line because they knew that it would anger him. Now, there is one important person that we will talk about that signed the Declaration of Independence. But before we get into that, I want to talk about what the significance of the Declaration of Independence is. Okay? First and foremost, it listed the reasons that the colonies wanted to be free. So thinking back to what we talked about last week, yes, he was taxing them. Yes, he wasn't giving them the representation that they needed in British court and British government. But there are a few other reasons. They're not necessarily as significant to the whole big picture, so we're not going to talk about them as much. They didn't lead to events. So there were a lot of reasons that they wanted to be free. It wasn't just because they wanted to. There's a lot of things that built up over time. Excuse me. It also declared that each colony was now an independent, excuse me, I spelled that wrong, independent state. So this is where it turned into the colonies, and then it started turning into the states that we now know today. Now, the original states and where they were drawn, not the same borders that we have today. That does change over time, but the colonies themselves, instead of being 13 colonies, they wanted to now be 13 states. So that's where it started. There were a few North Carolinians that went and signed the Declaration of Independence, who risked their lives. We do need to remember them because they are important, but then we'll talk about the other person who signed it just big and bold and didn't care. So the North Carolinians, we'll just say NC for the North Carolinians who signed the Declaration of Independence. It was Joseph Hughes, John Penn, and William Hooper. Those are some of the North Carolinians, the representatives that went and signed the Declaration of Independence. Now, the person that is still remembered more so today than I would say the others, because his name now represents something else, was John Hancock. John Hancock, on the Declaration of Independence, wrote his name the biggest and the clearest. He was not afraid of King George at all. He was one of the ones that set forward and said, I'm going to sign this big and bold, so he knows that I'm definitely one that wants to break away from his rule and from his reign. Now, after the Declaration of Independence came to be and it was put in order, North Carolina set up a state government. They gave a lot of their power to an assembly made up of two parts, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and then also each county within North Carolina then selected a senator and 2 House members. We are going to get into the government side of things later on in the year, so I don't want to talk about this right now. We will come back to it. We're not going to take notes on it right now. So the biggest thing is making sure we have our notes about the Halifax Resolves, the significance of that with North Carolina, and then again our notes about the Declaration of Independence. Tomorrow we are going to be talking about the battles of North Carolina and also who won, where they surrendered, all of that fun information. After you have your notes for today, my friends, please make sure you go on and complete your assignment and make sure we submit that. Also, if you're missing any other work from last week, please go ahead and take the time to complete that now as well. Thank you so much, and I'll see you boys and girls tomorrow.